The dense forest stretched beyond the horizon, an unbroken sea of evergreens and shadowed glades. The quiet hum of nature, birds calling, wind rustling leaves, the occasional snap of twigs underfoot, was the rhythm of life. It was the type of place that existed outside of time, where everything moved at its own pace, untouched by the world beyond its borders. Anna had been working in the remote wildlife sanctuary for years, long enough to recognize the subtle changes in the forest. She knew its pulse, its moods. She had become a part of the landscape, an observer more than a participant. Her job was simple: monitor the health of the animals, track their movements, ensure their survival in this protected space. But on this particular morning, the air felt heavy, thick with an energy she couldn't quite name. She stood near the edge of the sanctuary, her boots sinking into the damp earth as she scanned the tree line. The usual sounds of the forest were muted, distant. Even the breeze, which usually carried the scent of pine and moss, was strangely still. It felt as if the entire forest was holding its breath. The ranger station sat in a small clearing surrounded by trees, its walls weathered by time but sturdy, blending into the landscape as if it had always been there. Anna's radio crackled and she paused, listening to the brief static before a faint voice broke through, reporting a possible sighting of the lone wolf. This was no ordinary wolf. For months, sightings had been reported of a wolf that seemed to move alone, far beyond the pack's usual territory. It was larger than any other wolf, with a coat of deep, dark fur, and its eyes were said to glow with an unnatural intensity. Anna had heard the rumors, but she had never seen the creature herself. Until now. The forest was still, yet Anna could feel the pressure of something shifting, like a storm brewing just beneath the surface. She tightened her pack and started walking deeper into the woods, the familiar trail now feeling unfamiliar, as if it too had changed overnight. The sun had barely begun to rise, casting long, slanted shadows across the moss-covered ground. The trees seemed to press in on her, the silence growing thicker with each step. She passed by the old oak, a landmark she had seen countless times, but today it seemed like a sentinel, watching her, waiting. She had only walked a few hundred yards when the first sound reached her. Distant, a soft and drawn-out howl, the kind that seemed to stretch across the sky. It sent a chill down her spine. The lone wolf. The sound was unmistakable, but it was far off, too far for a pack member to have strayed. This wolf was alone. The wind picked up, and Anna's breath quickened. Her pace slowed as she moved deeper into the forest, her senses sharpened, alert. Her eyes scanned the shadows, searching for any movement, any sign of the wolf. She had been in this forest enough times to know that the animals here didn't hide from her. They watched her, yes, but they never feared her. Yet today, something felt different. Minutes passed, and Anna's footsteps were swallowed by the thick carpet of pine needles. The forest grew quieter still, the air thickening around her as the howl grew closer, more insistent. Another call rang out, closer now, and this time it was different. There was an edge to it, a desperation that sent a shiver down her spine. She stopped, crouching low, her heart pounding in her chest. The sounds of the forest had all but vanished, replaced by the eerie cry of the wolf. It seemed to be calling, not just howling, as though it were reaching out to something. Or someone. Anna moved toward the sound, her body tense with anticipation. She crept forward, making her way through the underbrush, careful not to make a sound. The wolf's cry came again, closer now but still distant, a haunting wail that filled the air with a sense of urgency. Her instincts told her to turn back, to retreat to the safety of the ranger station, but something kept pulling her forward. The wolf needed help. She could feel it in her bones, and despite the creeping dread that gnawed at her, she couldn't ignore the pull of that cry. She followed the sound for what felt like hours, but when she finally broke through a thicket of trees, the scene before her stopped her cold. A clearing stretched out before her, a circle of soft, golden light cutting through the canopy above. The lone wolf stood in the center of the clearing, its dark fur blending with the shadows. But it wasn't alone. At its feet lay another wolf, small, frail, its body twisted in a way that seemed unnatural. The air was thick with the scent of death. Anna's breath caught in her throat as she realized what she was looking at. The wolf at the center of the clearing wasn't just alone. It was mourning. The lone wolf's body language, the way it stood so still, head low and ears flattened, spoke volumes. It wasn't a cry of hunger or fear, but one of deep sorrow, of loss. Anna's mind raced. The sanctuary's records had mentioned a strange occurrence in the nearby pack. One of their own had gone missing months ago. The missing wolf. She had assumed it had simply wandered off, but this was something else. The lone wolf wasn't just a solitary creature. It was grieving for a lost packmate, a companion. Her gaze shifted to the injured wolf on the ground. It was still breathing, though shallowly, its eyes barely open. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. The lone wolf had not just been searching for food or territory. It had been searching for its fallen friend. And now it had found the body. It had been calling out to it. Anna hesitated, her mind torn. She knew the animal needed help, but she also knew the forest's rules. To intervene could be dangerous, both for her and for the sanctuary. She stepped forward cautiously, the sound of dry leaves underfoot like thunder in the otherwise silent space. The lone wolf's eyes locked onto hers, glowing with an intensity that seemed to cut through the darkness. For a moment, they just stood there, locked in an unspoken understanding. The wolf did not move, nor did it growl or show any signs of aggression. It simply watched her, as if waiting for something. Anna took another step forward, her body trembling. The injured wolf's breathing was becoming more labored, and the lone wolf's gaze shifted to it briefly before returning to Anna. In that instant, Anna knew. She couldn't leave it. Not like this. She took a deep breath and crouched down, reaching for her first aid kit, a tool that had never felt so inadequate in her hands. The lone wolf remained still, watching her every move. Just as she began to work on the injured wolf, a rustling came from the trees behind her. Anna froze. There, emerging from the shadows, was another figure, another wolf. But this one was different. Its eyes glowed with a strange, pale light, and its body was unnaturally still. For a heartbeat, she couldn't move, her heart pounding. The wolf stood there, silent and unblinking, before slowly turning and disappearing back into the forest. A whisper of wind followed, and Anna was left in stunned silence. The moment passed, the air suddenly lighter, and Anna returned to the injured wolf. The lone wolf, its eyes never leaving her, seemed to relax, as if satisfied that she had done what it could not. In the distance, a final howl echoed through the trees. The cry of a lone wolf. But this time, there was no desperation. There was only peace. Anna's hands trembled as she worked, but she pushed through the unease, tending to the injured wolf with as much care as she could muster. The pale light of the clearing seemed to grow dimmer, the shadows long and stretching like the limbs of the forest itself. Time felt suspended here, and yet the urgency of the situation pressed down on her. She could feel the weight of the lone wolf's gaze on her, its presence a constant reminder that the moment she was in was not an ordinary one. The injured wolf's breath was shallow, each inhalation a struggle. Anna applied pressure to a wound she could barely identify, working to stop the bleeding. The forest around them was unnaturally still. Not even the birds or the insects dared to break the silence that had settled in. Every breath she took seemed to echo, and the only sound was the faint rustle of the leaves in the trees above. It felt as though the forest itself was waiting, holding its breath with her. She looked up at the lone wolf, still standing a few paces away. It had not moved, its posture firm but relaxed. Its eyes glinted in the dim light, watching Anna with a quiet intensity that she could not explain. There was something ancient in the way it held itself, as though it knew more about this moment than she ever could. The thought crossed Anna's mind again, the missing packmate. Was this wolf truly grieving, or was there something deeper at play, something that went beyond the natural order of life and death? She couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, that this was not just about an injured animal or a lost companion. Something else was guiding her, pulling her forward into the unknown. She finished bandaging the wolf's wound and sat back, taking a deep breath. The air had grown colder, and the sky above had shifted, dark clouds rolling in slowly, as if responding to the energy of the moment. A storm was coming, but it felt distant, like a force that was not yet fully realized. Anna glanced at the lone wolf once more. Its expression had not changed. It still stood like a sentinel, its fur blending with the darkness of the trees, its body as still as the earth beneath them. And then, for the first time, it moved. The wolf took a few slow steps toward the injured wolf at Anna's side. It paused just beside her, its gaze never leaving the fallen creature. Anna held her breath, watching as the lone wolf lowered its head. She expected it to show some form of aggression, perhaps a challenge, but instead it stood there, calm, almost reverent. A sound broke the stillness, the faintest scrape of claws on stone. Anna turned her head, heart leaping in her chest. The pale-aimed wolf, the one that had appeared from the shadows earlier, was back. It stepped into the clearing, its movements deliberate, its eyes locked on the lone wolf. This time Anna didn't freeze. Her instincts screamed at her to move, to act. But she stayed rooted to the spot, uncertain of what was unfolding before her. The two wolves stared at each other across the clearing, their gazes locked in a silent exchange. Anna could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, a palpable tension in the air. She had the distinct sense that these wolves, these creatures, were communicating in a way that transcended the physical. They were not just animals, they were something more. The pale-aimed wolf took a step forward, its posture low but unwavering. It stopped just a few paces from the lone wolf, and for a long moment neither moved. Then, as if in perfect synchrony, the lone wolf gave a short, sharp bark, a sound that was both commanding and mournful. The pale-aimed wolf responded with a soft growl, its eyes narrowing. It was a sound of warning, of finality. Anna's heart raced as she watched the interaction unfold. She felt like an outsider in a world that was suddenly far beyond her understanding. She was no longer just a ranger in the forest. She was a witness to something deeper, something ancient, that she could barely comprehend. The lone wolf, seemingly satisfied with the pale-aimed wolf's response, turned back to the injured animal. It sniffed the air, a low whine escaping its throat. Then, without warning, it began to nudge the fallen wolf with its nose, coaxing it, as though trying to rouse it from its sleep. Anna's breath caught in her throat. She knew the wolf was beyond saving. There was no mistaking the deep wound that ran along its side, no denying the signs of fatal injury. And yet the lone wolf persisted, gently nudging, as if trying to wake it from a dream. And then something extraordinary happened. The air around them seemed to pulse, as if the forest itself was alive. The trees swayed in an invisible breeze, their branches rustling with an energy that felt like the earth itself was shifting. A tremor ran through the ground, subtle but unmistakable. Anna's heart skipped a beat. The pale lame wolf stepped forward once more, its movements fluid, like a shadow merging with the night. It crossed the clearing, its gaze fixed on the injured wolf. As it neared, the wolf's body seemed to twitch, its chest rising and falling in shallow breaths, as though it were struggling to return to life. The faintest sound, a soft, rasping growl, escaped from the creature's throat. Anna watched in stunned silence. The wolves, once so separate, were now united. The lone wolf, the pale-aimed wolf. They were no longer at odds. They were a part of something bigger, something ancient, and their connection was undeniable. The wind picked up again, this time with force. The storm that had been looming on the horizon had arrived, and the first heavy drops of rain began to fall. But it didn't matter. In that moment, Anna felt no fear, only awe. She knew this was a turning point, a pivotal moment where the natural world was speaking to her in a language she could not fully understand, but could never forget. As the rain poured down in sheets, the two wolves stood side by side, watching over the injured creature, and in that brief moment, Anna understood. This was not a fight for survival. It was a story of connection, of loss, of something beyond death. It was the cry of the lone wolf, not for a lost packmate, but for the balance of the world itself. The storm raged around them, but inside that clearing, time seemed to stop. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, the wolves turned and vanished into the depths of the forest. The rain continued to fall, but the forest was quiet once again. The air was thick with the sense that something had shifted, something unspoken but profound. Anna stood alone in the clearing, the only sound the steady patter of rain against the earth. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she was no longer afraid. She knew that this place, this forest, had shared its secret with her, and no matter where she went, she would carry that secret with her for the rest of her life. The lone wolf's cry had not been one of despair. It had been a call to the earth, a reminder that even in the face of loss, there is always a greater force at work. As the rain intensified, Anna remained in the clearing, unable to tear herself away from the quiet yet profound sense of finality that filled the air. The last traces of the wolves' presence lingered like a faint memory, a ghostly imprint in the space between the trees. The soft, steady rhythm of the rain on the forest floor became a heartbeat, a pulse of life continuing despite the mysteries that had just unfolded. The injured wolf, now silent and still, lay untouched beneath the cloak of the storm. Anna could no longer discern if it was simply resting or if it had truly passed. The faint glimmer of its once vivid gaze had dimmed, but the quiet air around it felt different. There was no hurry to bury it, no frantic need to act as if time were running out. Everything around her seemed to understand the importance of that moment. Even the rain, relentless as it was, didn't drown out the profound silence. Anna finally moved, the pull to leave the clearing growing stronger with each passing second. She reached for her pack, pulling it from the ground where she had left it behind. Her hands still trembled from the overwhelming sensation of having witnessed something beyond the physical world, something neither human nor animal could entirely comprehend. The wolves, once fierce and wild in their own right, had shown her the vulnerability of nature itself, but what did it all mean? As she gathered the rest of her gear, Anna found her gaze drifting to the darkened sky once more. The storm had intensified in the short time she had spent in the clearing, with thunder growling overhead and the trees swaying violently. She had to move, and quickly. Her path back to the ranger station would be long, but the weather had begun to turn treacherous, and the forest was no place to be in the midst of a full-on storm.